Thanks, Barbara. The new Republican governor reaches out to a big Democratic name. Mayor Emanuel brings investment bankers to preschool. And what about those Bears? Now joining us today to discuss these topics and more, our associate editor of Catalyst Chicago, Melissa Sanchez, editor-in-chief for IllinoisMirror.com, John Giocaris, and instructor at the Village Leadership Academy of St. Andrews Hutchinson. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
So what we heard from Governor-elect Rauner this week is that he is starting out on a very bipartisan note. Let's hear what he had to say.
We are committed to assembling the most talented team of leaders that's ever been assembled to turn around a state government anywhere in America.
His name on that team is Bill Daley, he of the famous Democratic name in Chicago. Melissa, smart move?
Of course. I mean, this election showed that the electorate is pretty divided, and he needs to reach across the aisle and look as if he's. We want to get things done in the state, and so he needs to get support from both Democrats and Republicans. What I'm unsure about is whether he's really gotten support from folks who disagree with him. Bill Daley, he's a Democrat, of course, but he shares a lot of similar business interests and similar other kinds of politics, even if it's not the party itself.
But he is from the most famous Democratic family in Illinois, John.
Yes, he is, and I think it's reflective of the broad and diverse coalition that Rauner had built to win a statewide election in Illinois. And for instance, he was the first gubernatorial Republican candidate in 20 years to open up a campaign office in the south side of Chicago since Jim Edgar. And but most importantly, I think Rauner is trying to not only signal his willingness to form a bipartisan governing coalition, but he's also signaling to House Speaker and House Speaker Madigan and Senate President Cullerton, who retained their veto-proof supermajorities, that he is going to matter. And even though that they have the numbers to override potential Rauner vetoes, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because even with those supermajorities, they were not able to pass a millionaire tax, they weren't able to pass a progressive tax, and they weren't able to make the 67% income tax hike permanent, which was passed during the lame duck session of 2011. And Rauner's telling them that he knows how Springfield works, and if they're going to try anything sneaky like that, he's not going to stand for it.
I want to get to that tax in a minute, but also on that transition team are two pastors, African-American pastors, Corey Brooks and James Meeks, who supported Rauner in the election. What does putting them on the transition team signal?
Well, I think it signals that there is at least an attempt to find that perspective. And I just want to touch that back also with your previous question about Daley. I mean, unfortunately, even though Daley's name is the historic political name within the city of Chicago, many communities of color particularly, have been left out of the conversation, even though there had been the outreach to, quote unquote, the pastor elite. And so my question, even with Meeks and with Corey Brooks, is, are we really going to get a street level perspective in this administration? Are we really going to hear that perspective coming into the governor's office, coming into Springfield, or is that going to have to be kind of a bubbling up or a fighting up, if you will, to make sure that perspective is actually expressed?
The big elephant in the room here, which John just brought up, is the idea of the income tax hike. It's supposed to become permanent. As of January 1st, Rauner campaigned against it, and we even have the Republican controller of the state of Illinois, Judy Bartopinka, saying that it's going to be disaster if that income tax hike is rolled back. So is Rauner in a pickle here? What does he do? Melissa?
I don't know. I mean, I think he wants to have a debate with everybody, right? I'm not exactly sure.
John?
Well, it is. He did campaign on honoring the original promise of the income tax hike, which was that it was supposed to be temporary and sunset. For starters, he's going to focus on economic growth and also transitioning from a more income tax-based revenue generator to a services-based, tax-based revenue generator, which is smart because we are transitioning from a products-driven economy to a services-driven economy now. And, again, spending has to be looked at as well. But again, a campaign promise is a campaign promise, and it should sunset.
Topinka says it's going to cause, quote, a financial heart attack because of a $4 billion hole in the budget.
Well, I have great respect for Topeka. I mean, she, regardless of her political affiliation, she's been, from my opinion, has been a pragmatist in the sense of understanding what the reality is on the ground. And so if she's saying that, I'd call question to, is this really a realistic promise that can actually be fulfilled upon? Because the reality is we need money. The state needs money, and how else are you going to do it if you don't have some function to do that with?
And Mayor Emanuel is calling on Governor-elect Rauner to extend that income tax hike as well as to raise the minimum wage. Also, here in Chicago, the mayor is starting to implement a new plan to borrow money from big banks and the Pritzker Family Foundation to put into preschool for potentially troubled kids. Melissa, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a really complicated and fascinating financial tool that the city's going to. It's a brand new, it's called social impact bonds. There's only been a handful in the US. And I think as the Chicago Tribune investigation in the past week has shown us with the auction rate bonds, there's all sorts of long-term possible trouble when we go into something like this. On the face of it, it looks as if we're getting money that the city can't get otherwise to pay for very, very high quality preschool in the city for the poorest
$17 million.
kids. $17 million. But at the end of the day, when this program is over after 17, 18 years, the city's going to pay likely more than twice that much back to those bankers. And what's important to know is that when this is talked about, we celebrate the bankers and we thank the bankers for investing in our kids who most need it. But the bankers are going to make money at the end of the day. They're not putting their money into any old program. They're putting money into a program that has been shown through all sorts of decades of research that it's the best program in Chicago. So there's no real risk. In addition, like as you mentioned,
well, there is the financial risk, right? Because the bankers are taking the financial risk. They're taking $17 million.
Before they take the risk, though, the Pritzker Family Foundation is taking the risk first.
Right.
Any loss will get taken by philanthropists. And they're not investing in a risky program. They're investing in a program that has decades of research that shows that it works.
But if we need the money, John, why not?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I give Mayor Emanuel credit for at least thinking outside the box here. Basically how this works, as I understand it, is that by attracting these philanthropists and bankers to take all the risk in investing in these programs and funding them, it'll also provide some relief from the taxpayer, which, as we were just discussing, I mean, if anything, tax rates are probably going to be going up one way or the other. And so in that respect, I mean, states like Ohio and Colorado have implemented similar programs, and a red state and a blue state. And, yeah, we don't have enough years of research yet to study, but it's got to start somewhere. So, again, I think it's worth a try.
Jose?
Well, when I heard about this, the one word that came to my mind was derivatives. And I apologize if that sounds naive or if that sounds condescending, but I mean, it's very complex as far as how this is actually going to pay out.
But as I understand it, these banks would only get the money back if the kids reach certain educational benchmarks.
Well, and then I have a concern with that. Why don't we invest in programs that work? Why don't we do that as a society? And I mean, yeah, they're proven to work, but one of the biggest problems has been there hasn't been the funding to do that from the public sector and from society in general. And I mean, I'm in education, and we see what works, and we know that we need the resources to make it work, but this sounds almost like corporate sponsored. I mean, it's corporate-sponsored education, and that's a concern for me.
All right, we have to leave the city of Chicago for a minute and move up to the suburbs, Park Ridge, where people are upset about a developer, John O'Flaherty, who wants to build a condo project. A bunch of them turned out at a public meeting, and now they're named in a lawsuit, and some of them are not happy about it, as we'll hear right here.
He's suing the city, he's suing the people who spoke up, and that's, to me, that's against the freedom of speech.
Is that a violation of freedom of speech?
Well, it's being billed that way, but a popular misconception is that freedom of speech protection extends to what private parties do with one another. It actually, when it comes to the Supreme Court, freedom of speech applies to what the government can and can't do to you. So in this case, it's really more of a ordinance zoning permit case. I think these developers feel that they have been unfairly denied this zoning ordinance. And the only practical reason I can think of why they've named all these parties is they're going to make the argument that in being unfairly denied this, all these people showed up and said all these bad things about them, which just isn't true.
They have the right to do that. They went to a public meeting, right? Ordinary citizens, Melissa. Is this
Yeah.
intimidating to them?
It definitely is. And the part that I don't understand is why, just legally, I don't understand if the residents have had anything to do with the decision. It seems like the folks you'd want to sue would be the city and the zoning board, not the residents. I'm not sure if any intelligent judge would allow that to happen. There's no standing, I don't think, for those residents.
Jose?
Well, I think the problem, first of all, is anybody can file a lawsuit against anybody, and it definitely is intimidating. I mean, when you get that paper in your hand saying you're being sued and you've been actually following your right as a citizen, how is that fair, first of all? But I think it unfortunately looks like an intimidation tactic.
Don't we want to encourage citizens who have concerns to go to these meetings
Definitely.
and speak out?
It probably is an intimidation tactic. I mean, that's what one of the residents felt, and like Osei said, basically I think they're trying to get people to quiet down so they can just get this permit and be done with it.
Do you think it has the potential to backfire against the developer here?
Oh,
Melissa?
definitely.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, people are going to be complaining about this even more. Hasn't the city said that they too will try to get the names of the residents off the lawsuit?
They are trying to. It's going to be interesting to see what happens,
Yeah.
whether that project is ever built. And finally, the sports desk. The villagers here in Chicagoland are getting restless.
Getting
I think
pitchforks.
The pitchforks
And their torches.
are on the way. The Bears lost yet another game, a humiliating defeat to Green Bay, and here's what a couple of fans had to say about that.
That was disappointing. I mean, it was like a middle school team versus a college level team. So,
being a Bears fan when these things happen, it's very tough to stay a Bears fan.
He looks very,
Seriously,
very,
he
very
looks heartbroken.
sad about this. So the Bears have now given up more than 50 points 2 games in a row. What's a suffering fan to do here?
Which hasn't happened since 1923, by the way. So I think I think our problems start on the defensive side of the ball. I've learned by now that Jay Cutler has finally replaced Al Capone as public enemy #1 in Chicago. But for all the flack he gets, I think we should start with a new defensive coordinator yesterday.
Does it hurt a little bit that our quarterback is now the highest paid player in the National Football League?
Well, that's what kills me. These are millionaires. Let's be clear about that, and this is their job. But I think also the back office has to look at this and say, okay, how do we, if we're a business and we're trying to produce a product, which is a winning team, what do we need to do to get that business in order? And from my perspective, who's not a big football fan, but it doesn't look like those business decisions have been made well.
Melissa, are Chicago fans just too hard on the Bears?
Maybe. It's sports, right? We're not complaining when we're winning. I think we have to take the losses with the wins.
You know, I'm wondering, we've had 2 very nice, polite head coaches in a row with Mark Trestman and Lovie Smith. Do you think Chicago, because of who the city is, needs more of a Mike Ditka type?
They want that. They definitely want that. They like animated coaches. Actually, 3 in a row. Dick Duran was pretty calm and cool too. And a lot of fans, you walk into any sports bar and they're very animated. Chicago sports fans, it's life and death with them. So I think they definitely want to see someone with a lot more energy on the sidelines there.
But let's not forget, Lovey got us to the Super Bowl. And Lovey, I thought, was a great coach. I think that part of this is the fickleness of the fans in saying, okay, there are ebbs and flows in this process. And I think a lot of people forgot that we did fairly well over the tenure of Lovie Smith.
Does Chicago take this more personally than other cities, do you think?
You know, I've talked to people from here who have lived in California, for instance, and come back, and they've said, in Chicago, you can walk in any bar, talk about any sport, any team, and everyone knows what you're talking about. He's like, California has 12 professional sports teams, and the only person everyone there knows is Kobe Bryant from his lawsuit days, not from his playing days.
That's a good point.
All right, on that note, we have to wrap it up. I want to thank our guests, Melissa Sanchez, John Giocaris, and Osei David Andrews Hutchinson.